What do Gary Stevenson, Zach Polanski, and Renat Piorweth all have in common? They all support a wealth tax, a policy that's been gaining momentum as Rachel Reeves mulls over a litany of potential tax proposals in the upcoming November budget. The most prominent proposed tax is an annual tax of 1% on all assets over £10 million and 2% on all assets over £1 billion. It's a proposal that has been pilloried in the mainstream media. To quote just one example from establishment mouthpiece The Spectator, Polanski is talking nonsense about wealth taxes. The piece argues in the same stuff we've heard time and time again about wealth taxes. It will lead to all the wealthy people who would be impacted by the tax fleeing overseas to tax havens. And Matthew Bowles writes this: France tried almost exactly that, with a rate charged on individuals ranging from 0.5% to 1.5% on assets over €10 million. The outcome was not a revenue boom, but a mass exodus of the very taxpayers it targeted. Between 2000 and 2016, some 60,000 billionaires upped sticks. The Impôt de Solidarité sur la Fortune, ISF, or Solidarity Tax on Wealth, contributed just 2% of tax receipts during its lifespan. To add some context, there are currently almost 3 million millionaires in France, and in 2010 it was 1.7 million. The Spectator article quotes a period of 16 years for its supposed wealth exodus, which works out in less than 1% of the total millionaire population leaving. Hardly that much of an exodus now, is it? Almost amusingly, he even admits that it raised money. 2% of tax is roughly equivalent to half of our entire military budget in the UK. Not that anyone would care about what anyone from The Spectator thinks. The mainstream media are always well out of step with what the consensus of the public, especially those who haven't been given the privilege of a private education like the majority of the UK's journalists. And now we have some actual data on what the public think should be a priority in terms of tax reform. Pollster YouGov asked 2,100 people whether they support or oppose a variety of tax reforms suggested by various politicians and economists, and the most popular policy by far was the Green Party's wealth tax, with a whopping 75% in support and only 12% opposing, with support from voters from all 5 major political parties. Given the wall-to-wall derision the policy has received in the press, this shows that one can only manufacture so much consent. People can see that inequality is a huge problem in our society, and it is necessary to fix it. So much so, in fact, that in a follow-up question in which YouGov asked respondents if they still supported the tax, even if it were to lead to enough capital flight that would mean a net loss to the Treasury, a plurality of respondents still supported it. Now, this is important. As was pointed out by Zach Polanski when speaking with Victoria Derbyshire last weekend, we don't necessarily need a wealth tax to engage in capital investment, given that the UK is a sovereign currency issuer. Additional revenue is always welcome, but the key goal of this policy is to have a more equitable distribution of assets by encouraging asset hoarders to liquidate them. Now, it wasn't just wealth taxes that YouGov asked about. If we go back to their poll, there are some other pretty good ideas here that are worth exploring. I spoke about on last week's show about how council tax reform, which also has majority support, but there are also majority support for an exit tax at 39% support. A mansion tax gets over 49% support, that's positive support that is, and a Reform UK proposal that would add a 5% surcharge on employer national insurance contributions for foreign workers to incentivise firms to employ British people first before looking to poach workers from overseas also had support there too. Now, when it comes to an exit tax, this is something I really support. All of the talk of capital flight very specifically being the biggest thing that people have concerns with over taxation on the rich. Well, if they want to leave, then you have to tax them on unrealised capital gains before they do, meaning that we will be able to disincentivize those from leaving because the tax bill will be too high for them to leave. Stay domiciled here, make sure they keep paying taxes here as well. And I actually do support the Reform UK proposal there as well. It doesn't stop anybody from wanting to come here and being employed, and it doesn't place the burden upon those migrants themselves. What it does mean, though, is that employers can't use international labour. They can't poach international labour from other countries that also need it without paying that surcharge. And on top of this, it does mean that they're incentivised to look at British people first and then to consider people from overseas who would still be able to do so if they had a work visa. Reeves, however, has not, it seems, as of yet considered most of the taxes proposed here. In true Starmerite fashion, she's not going after those with the broadest shoulders, but has briefed the press that the target is yet again potentially going to be the disabled. Reeves is reportedly considering ending VAT exemption on the Motability scheme and ending inclusive insurance for Motability users in the hope of clawing back roughly £1 billion for the Treasury. The Motability Scheme is a charity that provides new vehicles for the disabled on lease, which those who are entitled to a variety of disability payments can access if and only if they qualify for the enhanced mobility elements of those payments. In layman's terms, if they can prove that they have significant mobility issues, then they can use the extra welfare that they receive from that qualification on a leased car from Motability. So it's an option that you can use that enhanced payment for. It's not like a specific thing that you qualify for on its own. It's a lifeline for many disabled people in ensuring their personal freedom, especially since disability payments like PIP are not an out-of-work benefit, and making it increasingly unaffordable for them will only pile an extra burden upon those who already have significant extra needs. Reeves has essentially been convinced by this because it's been a bugbear of the crank right for a while. Here's something Shadow DWP Minister Helen Whately posted on Twitter today.
I've just forced the government to reveal how much they're spending on the Motability Scheme. It's more than £3 billion of taxpayer cash this year alone. That's £300 million more than last year, a shocking increase in government spending. It's clear Motability has spiralled out of control. It was set up so disabled people could get around, but now people are getting free cars for acne and ADHD. And 1 in 5 new cars are Motability cars. That's not fair and that's not affordable. But we have a plan. Limit Motability to people with serious disabilities only and stop tax breaks for luxury cars. It's time to get benefits under control. Welfare should be a safety net, not a lifestyle choice.
Right, so there's a few things there that are just like abject lies, okay? Like just complete lies. First of all, when it comes to the expenditure on Motability, that all comes out of the money the government would already be spending on the higher rate of mobility payment for things like PIP in England, for example, right? Like, you don't qualify for anything extra by being a Motability recipient. That's just an option that you have if you qualify for that higher rate payment. You can use that on something else if you want. You have the option of using Motability. If the Motability Scheme was completely closed tomorrow, the expenditure of the government would not change, because it is that higher mobility payment, higher rate mobility payment, that is what is important here, and that's what the expenditure is on. When it comes to the eligibility, you have to pass an incredibly grueling and degrading assessment to prove that you have the serious mobility problems that require that higher payment in the first place just to qualify, right? So no one is going to get a qualification for a free car from the state because they have acne or because they have ADHD or anxiety, right? You have to prove to the people who are doing your assessment that you have significant mobility issues, enough for the higher rate that warrants being able to have access to this money and then potentially the Motability Scheme if you want to use it. When she says, make sure it's for serious disabilities only, that is quite literally already the case. And the reason why 1 in 5 new cars are being sold as Motability is because fundamentally, people can't really afford to buy new cars anymore. The number of new cars being sold into the regular market is lower than it was before the pandemic. And since the pandemic, that's the cost of living crisis. That means people's expenditure that they have access to means that they can't afford to buy new cars, or fewer people can afford to buy new cars. Motability is a godsend, in fact, for broadly our automotive industry in this country, is because it's a way of being able to ensure that there is a steady stream of cars being bought new and then being sold to dealerships to be sold on secondhand to regular people in the country, right? You get a 3-year lease on Motability cars. And so you'll keep refreshing that as people continue to get access to new vehicles. I mean, the Motability Scheme provides this consistent expenditure on new cars that then makes sure that we have a secondhand market that can cope with demand. So it's just all either misdirection, nonsense, or abject lies that she's saying there. But what this has been is an example of what has been known as posting to policy, where blue check Twitter accounts will post incessantly about a certain subject until terminally online politicians take note and support it once it gains enough attention. If you want an idea on how these kinds of people want the disabled to be treated, here's a suggestion from GB News opinion spewer Tom Harwood from one of his many, many, many tweets about the subject of Motability. Make all the free cars the government gives out to people with autism or ADHD look like this, and see how many people really need to claim them. Like, at the point at which we are forcing people who need to rely on state help to be able to deal with things such as mobility issues that most people in this country don't have. These are very serious things. As I said, you need to qualify for a very stringent, a very high level of mobility payment to even get access to mobility in the first place. And then saying, if you want to do that, you have to mark yourselves out as a disabled person, and not with a small blue badge or something that lets people know so that they can take care, by emblazoning mobility on the side of a car, and we'll choose an ugly Fiat multiplier as well, just so we can try and humiliate the people who have access to this stuff. It's pure politics of envy, something that the right throw at the left all the time when it comes to things like us wanting to have higher wages. But in fact, it's really politics of envy, because it's people who somehow think that they've missed out because there's this mythical cohort of disabled people who are getting things that they shouldn't be getting access to. But in reality, they're just jealous. Why would you be jealous though? Like, disabled people have a really tough lot in life. They really go through a lot of stuff. And not only do they have to deal with all of the conditions that they have for being disabled, they then have to deal with all of the actual hoops they have to jump through from the state to get access to any help at all, which is a degrading and humiliating process. And then they have to deal with people like Tom Harwood, who want to humiliate them in public because they feel that they are getting something that they shouldn't have access to. It's pure envy. Ash, why do these people relentlessly go after the disabled?
Well, look, I think you kind of answered the question yourself, so I'm going to try and add to what you've said rather than try and replace it or augment it in any way. I mean, what's going on is that there is a feedback loop, which is the pursuit of policies which disproportionately harm working class people, disabled people, people who have vulnerabilities in any kind of way. Those policies include austerity, the disastrous Andrew Lansley era NHS reforms, gutting local authorities of money, in particular the money that goes towards adult social care, pursuing reckless policies of privatization and outsourcing. So it makes the delivery of these services absolutely extortionate. I mean, one thing that people are right about is that there are savings that could be made in public spending. It's just you make those savings by insourcing rather than forking out to private equity owned care homes and the like. But I digress. You pursue all of these policies, which have resulted in a poorer, less healthy country where people who may have had, a serious condition may now present with 2, 3, or even 4 comorbidities as well because of these policy decisions. And then you go, oh, look, the welfare bill's really high. Well, yeah, because you've created a less healthy, less enabled society. Of course, that's going to be more on the welfare bill. And so then you punish people for being the consequence of your very own policy decisions. And the reason why they don't want to do that is because they don't want to tackle the absolutely hideous levels of inequality that we've seen over the past few decades. And I think that this is an important point to hammer down, which is that the kind of inequality that we have isn't simply the result of a sort of, natural consolidation of wealth that's been happening organically. Of course, that's a part of it. The tendency towards monopoly is something which is inherent to capitalism. But there have also been some really significant policy interventions to make that happen. So selling off of council housing was one way of transferring public wealth into private hands. A significant number of council houses that were sold off under right to buy are now operated as buy to let by landlords. You also have forms of wealth transfer which take place in that very outsourcing and privatization that I discussed before. You have work being taxed disproportionately, especially when you compare it to inheritance, and especially when you compare it to investment as well. These are all things which turbocharge the inequality that we live with. And I think that this loops back to the thing that you were saying about wealth taxes, Helena, which is we're constantly being told if the multi-millionaires and billionaires leave, society's fucked. Well, let's just have a look at the society we have, where we have seen a massive growth in the wealth of billionaires, the number of billionaires we have, and a growth in the multi-millionaire class as well. Now, what we have also seen alongside the growth of the billionaire and multimillionaire class is low productivity, falling standards of living, flatlining wages, crumbling public services, and deepening regional inequality. So we're being told, well, having millionaires and billionaires is really, really good for you. And sure, when you look at the amount that they're able to contribute to HMRC, contribute an amount which is pretty high, but they are choking the life out of other areas of the economy. So I think one of the mistakes that we have sometimes made on the left is that we've talked about the economy and what needs to happen purely through the lens of tax. And actually, the kinds of change that we need to see are far, far bigger. And we shouldn't just talk about, making savings when it comes to public expenditure as though it's a right wing thing and the only way you can do it is by punishing disabled people. No, part of how you do that is stop letting private equity run key parts of state provision. That's one way in which you can save on public expenditure.
Absolutely, absolutely. I think Labour in the run-up to the election promised the biggest wave of insourcing in a generation. Where did that go? I was actually watching Politics Live on stream the other day, and they had a disabled guy who was eligible for Motability on the show. And he specifically said, my claim was dealt with by Capita. They misassessed me because they didn't do the assessment properly, meaning I lost my entitlements and I had to go for 2 months without and had to go through a whole load of litigation to try and get that back, given the terrible job that they'd done. So not only are our outsourcers, responsible for extra money the state has to spend on directorial salaries and shareholder dividends, which wouldn't need to if it was insourced, they also do a worse job because they don't have any kind of democratic accountability because they only have an interest in profit because they're a private company. And it is the government themselves who are trying to ensure that they don't have democratic accountability either because they can just blame the outsourcer instead. It's a vicious cycle that just leads us with worse outcomes over and over and over again, and we're having to pay extra for the privilege as well. But yet another privatization success story.